Let's see what changes are coming for Affliction 9.1. Blah blah. Dots are stronger. Well, we're back to being El Supreme Dot Extravaganza. Well, let's practice our dots then. Agony. Corruption. Now an AoE.
What the fuck are you doing, man?
I'm just adding a sound effect to dots, man, so they feel more impactful. You don't know about that stuff.
Man, listen, I don't think this whole YouTube thing is doing good for your mind. Plus, you're doing it all wrong. It doesn't sound like it's
No, it's
no, it's
Yo guys, that's it. I'm done. I'm done. I'm gonna go edit bedtime streams from now on when it all makes sense. What the fuck is wrong with you? Jesus Christ, man.
Wait, don't go to the bathtub streams, man. Jesus. But instead, how about you like and subscribe the video? How about these negotiation skills? No, really, it does really help the video out and the channel, and of course you will get all sorts of cool stuff that we do nowadays, podcasts and tier lists and news shows again about 9.1 and all the 9.1 goodies, well related of course. So thank you. Now let's get on with the show. Let's talk about what has been nerfed first so you can relax. Focus Malignancy starts providing a 7% increased damage buff to Malefic Rupture on unstable affliction targets, down from the 15% and scaling up. This ends up with a 17% at max rank, down from 36%. Overall, this is a pretty significant nerf to the single target damage output of Affliction. It's a bit early to see if the conduit will still have a place in 9.1, but its numbers being low might make the others more competitive. That and the change to the Cold Embrace conduits to Withering Bolt might make single target options a bit more competitive. Withering Bolt will now increase the damage Shadow Bolt and, by extension, Drain Soul do to the targets depending on how many dots they have on. Since both of these spells are single target only, the effect really only applies in single target scenarios, and these tie into a change much bigger than this. Shadow Embrace is no longer passive and has replaced Dark Collar, which is now a passive baseline. These changes are more impactful than they may seem. On one hand, Shadow Embrace was a tedious thing to maintain on multiple targets, yet something I have found personally enjoyable as a skillful thing to do for a decent increase in damage output, especially on bosses like Huntsman. It did become annoying with multiple targets up to a point where it was irrelevant fighting enough enemies at once. It being a talent with an increased duration to 16 seconds makes it easier to manage and maybe even competitive with Haunt. On the other hand, Dark Collar being something you no longer need to talent in means Dark Glare is now a 2-minute cooldown. This instantly means it will align with every Dark Soul from now on, which is great for the overall damage profile of the spec. A lot of cooldowns in Shadowlands have a 2-minute recharge time, and seeing as how a lot of bosses in Athria were designed to favor 1 to 2 minute cooldown specs, this could be a big buff to the spec's performance if this design choice remains true for Sanctum of Domination as well. Another note that's not clear from the tooltip is that Haunt and Shadow Embrace will now increase the damage your targets take from your pets and spell damage procs as well. And although initially, based on some general number crunching, the swap between Dark Collar and Shadow Embrace was a slight DPS loss because you don't have the Haunt and Shadow Embrace multipliers working together, now with the change to pets and procs and the new conduit and the dot buffs, overall there's a slight 1 to 2% DPS gain. Assuming you were maintaining Shadow Embrace on the boss close to perfectly before, the damage gain was higher than having Dark Glare 1 minute sooner. At the same time, the burst value of them aligning could offset that since raids usually prefer a bursty damage profile. Malefic Rupture has been also nerfed by around 18% based on the calculations of the Warlock community, and instead Agony has been buffed by about 20%, seeing as how the leading conduit, Focus Malignancy, was also nerfed. The overall effect was aimed to change the damage profile of Affliction from a Malefic Rupture-centric playstyle to a multi-dot spec, as it should be. Malefic Rupture seems to have been added to fix the cumbersome AoE rotation the spec had and reduce the amount of ramp up before the spec dealt any significant amount of damage. Although I think that works well with the current content design, the spec did seem to rely too heavily on malefic rupture for its damage and lost a bit of that identity that made it unique. Corruption has been buffed as well to now deal 91% spell power over 14 seconds from the previous 78.75%. This fits in the same argument as before, where Affliction's damage will be more dot-centric. To also go along with it, Seed of Corruption will be buffed to explode for 50% spell power damage, up from 40%. This means an essential 25% detonation damage bonus. Coupled with the increased damage of Corruption and nerf of Malefic Rupture, Affliction can maybe finally take Sow the Seeds in Mythic Plus dungeons and actually feel okay. And the reason I'm saying this is because Sow the Seeds was already a good talent to take, but what made it unpopular was probably the long cast time, most likely, which we still have, but now the payback will be bigger. Personally, I always disliked Affliction playstyle in BFA when doing Mythic Plus content. Ramping up multiple dots on multiple targets seemed like a chore, and it was a chore even in 9.0. Less so with the Malefic Rupture explosion at the end. But looking at the spec from its base design, Seed of Corruption and mechanics similar to this where you can spread dots in 1 or 2 global efficiently, since that targeting 10 times is no longer an engaging playstyle in 2021, is something that more specs like Affliction should be getting. Spread dots with 1 or 2 spells, that's it, not tap target 10 times. Dark Pact has also been buffed once again to sacrifice the same percentage of your current HP, but the added baseline health on top of it all has been increased to be a larger part of your spell power. For my Warlock, on my eye level, this means around 1.7k HP bonus on live and 7.2k on PTR from a total of 36k HP that I have. This means that I get 20% of my HP converted into a shield equaling 250% of that amount, sacked, and a little over 5% of max HP on life and 20% of my max HP on PTR. This is a major buff to the raw numbers, which for my character means that if I pop this at max HP, I get an extra 25% stronger shield on the PTR. Do these numbers confuse you? I'm confused. Whether these numbers scale in a different direction with more eye level, it's unlikely they will scale worse since spell power improves significantly with each new raid tier. I personally will feel more comfortable using it for sure. And the last bits of changes so far will be resumed to legendaries. Wrath of Consumption was altered slightly to now give you a stack of its buff if both Corruption and Agony were on the target at the time of its death. So if you consistently keep both up, which in the majority of cases you will and you should, you will effectively double your stack generation. An okay buff for legendary I have hardly seen being played. Its effect could still be good in dungeons since the buff lasts for 30 seconds, but fundamentally seems counterintuitive still. Depending on your group and if it's not tyrannical, maintaining a high uptime on the buff is not hard though, and the numbers it can generate can surpass synergy in terms of legendary strength, demonic synergy. Sacrolash's Dark Strike has been reworked as well, much to the dismay of some and rejoice of others. Now, Corruption deals 25% more damage, and every time it ticks on the target, it extends the active duration of curses on your target by 2 seconds. This clearly sees more applications into PvP, although on necrotic or tough weeks where your tank needs to kite, Seed of Corruption into Curse of Exhaustion spam can be a thing. A shitty thing, a shitty way to AoE slow, but a way nonetheless. Affliction is a good spec right now. Historically, it has always been decent in raids, at least for a few tiers per expansion. Even now, with it being a powerhouse, we see it in the top 3. Sure, logs can be relative sometimes, and with the power inflation given by power infusion, it's hard to figure out exactly how good a spec is compared to the rest. One thing is for sure, AF is at the top, but not the best right now. The Malefic Rupture and Focus Malignancy nerfs on top of Shadow Embrace and Dark Calling swap will knock it down a few pegs in a world where Boomy has been nerfed and Shadow Priest nerfed a bit as well, although numbers are subject to change. In dungeons, in my casual opinion, it still feels like Affliction, like other specs, are not designed to strive in the encounters that devs are developing, with Wrath of the Consumption being a good example as to how they see the spec tackling AoE. Wrath of Consumption still seems awkward to use despite its potentially impactful buff, suggesting a low downtime between pulls. The issue with this is in the playstyle it suggests. You want to make the most out of the 30-second damage amp buff, which activates upon things already dying. You only need 2 to 3 targets now to get the full stacks as opposed to 5, but unless you will still be in combat with a lot of the targets after those 2 or 3 targets die, or 30 seconds, or more or less, or instantly engage a new pack afterwards, the effectiveness of this will fully never apply. Players are smart though, and they will always find a way around an issue, which is a testament of what good game design can do by posing a problem so we could find the solution. And this also feeds more into the ramp up damage, or rather the invest into rotation now so you can have the damage later type playstyle. The encounter design and consequently the meta favor upfront burst damage specs, which will always put Affliction at a disadvantage. This is not to say that Affliction isn't able to clear keys. If anything, it's received a massive boost since BFA, and it clears and has been clearing keys over 20 for a while now, and it holds its own against the meta favored specs. It's at least above average when looking at the top logs in Mythic Plus, and performs better than the recently buffed Elemental, probably because its single target damage still melts bosses, which end up being the real obstacles in higher and higher keys. On top of all of this, we will have more conduit slots next patch, a new raid with new raid gems to socket for specific raid buffs. Personally, I don't have any doubts that Affliction will be a solid addition to any raid team, but we'll keep a closer eye on Mythic Plus performance. All of the number crunching and testing and theory crafting has been done by the Council of the Black Harvest community, which has a Discord link down below that you can check. The lads and ladies there have a much deeper understanding of the spec, and we definitely recommend you stay up to date with what they post regarding all things Warlock. A special thank you to Motoko, who gave us a bit of insight on the 9.1 changes. One of the leading Warlocks in the community and in the Council of the Black Harvest Discord, Motoko is a bigger brain than us when it comes to Warlock, and as of this recording, there are still things needed to be tested before we can draw a line. The numbers are not yet set in stone, testing will need to be done, simming, theory crafting, and probably more tuning from the devs, but overall, I am excited for Affliction 9.1. Let's see how it will all pan out. And speaking of how things pan out, there's no good synergy. Thank you, Patreons. Thank you for the support. Thank you for supporting everything that we do, both on YouTube and on Twitch, with all of the podcast tier list guides and class changes videos and new news videos. That's right, dear viewer. If you like the kind of stuff that we do and you want to support us a little bit more, it will be very, very appreciated. Of course, it's not required, but you can find the link down below where you will find our Patreon page and a lot of other interesting links that might spark your interest. Who wrote this script? Never mind, it's freestyle. Thank you for watching the video, guys. See you next time.
I've been loving it then, I still love it now. Still, I play WoW. Still, I play WoW. Getting better every day, let me show you how. Cause still, I play WoW. Still, I play WoW. It's getting harder to stay, but at the end of the day, it's a guilty pleasure, so just log in and play. Whether it's classic or retail, I'ma do a /bow. Still, I play WoW.